Greetings, fellow tarot travelers, tripping through the tetrahedral triptych of cards I shall lay before you. I'm Tarot Torch. Well, a lot is going on in Libya currently. Oil is still the main driving force behind all actions in Libya. But there are two basic governments, each with their own central bank. Al-Baida's government linked to Tobruk-based parliament, and Haftar is backed by Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the UAE. Well, that's a lot of foreign words to a lot of people all at once. But basically, the UN has one government that is in Tripoli that is backed by London and America and the United Nations. And there's this other government ran by Haftar, which is a militaristic dictatorship backed by Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the UAE. Strange that the UAE would be with this group, since the UAE had been a friend of America for such a long time. The East, which is Haftar's group, sustains $23 billion in bonds to wage its war in bills in its central bank, with Russia printing 10 billion dinars for the East. So the whole group of people supporting Haftar, the military general, which is Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the UAE, the whole thing is being bankrolled by Russia. London, however, supports the Western UN-backed government in Tripoli and prints them money. $80 billion worth of oil reserves are managed by Tripoli, but Haftar has taken over the oil fields in the east and south. So you basically have a situation where London is processing the oil transactions, but Haftar owns the oil fields. And the two governments have worked well together in managing the situation with the different chieftainships, I guess you can call them, the sheiks, the sheikdoms, in many cases just gangs. And they've been able to keep the Islamists at bay and process the nation's wealth of oil for European consumption. Now, France and Italy are wanting to act to liberate the huge oil potential of Libya, of course. And he is the Italian oil giant, and they pump 320,000 barrels a day at $78 a barrel, whereas the French oil company is only pumping 1/10 of this. Now, Libya is being rushed to elections before the Haftar invasion began by the European oil interests. But the other side, ran by Haftar in the east and in the south, grew impatient and has marched on Tripoli and is currently in a stalemate situation. They can't move because if America gets involved or London gets involved in military action, and if France joins in and we have an EU, United States action, Russia is not going to send its military in. And Egypt, UAE, and Saudi Arabia do not have enough to defeat an EU, American, Canadian alliance. So, frankly, they're stuck in the mud, or in the sand in this case. Now, the trouble with Field Marshal Khalifa Haftar, who's the head of the Eastern Libya National Army, although he's defeated Daesh in many parts of the country, Haftar, well, he was a general in Gaddafi's army, and he defected to America and lived in North Virginia for 10 or 20 years working for the CIA. He returned to Libya to take part in the revolution against Gaddafi. Haftar still has dual U.S. citizenship, so he can't just sell out to Russia entirely. Well, the thing is that General Haftar looks good to the European oil interests because he's a strong hand and he'll keep things in line. And typically, United Nations goes in, sets up a weak government, and lets the local people overthrow it and establish a new regime during transitional phases like this. But there are some real problems with Haftar. He's marched almost 7 miles from Tripoli currently. His LNA militia is now 7 miles from Tripoli, and Haftar's in charge. But, Haftar in 1969 defected from the king to Gaddafi. In 1986, he defected from Gaddafi to Sanhibri. In 1987, he defected to the CIA. And then to the National Front Salvation of Libya, which was Libya's first opposition. In 1992, he defected to the reform and change movement of Vibrat Wisi. In 2004, he defected back to Gaddafi. In 2011, he defected against Gaddafi. In 2014, he defected against the first nationally elected parliament. Then he defected to the UAE. Then he defected against the United Nations-backed plan 1 month after the plan was passed. So Haftar is just, a flip-flop dictator looking for people to enslave. And when Haftar attacks, he destroys regions completely, as in Derna. So, we have a real problem with Haftar, with his integrity and with how he wants to run a military dictatorship. And he's made statements that after subsuming Libya, he's going to march on into Algeria. And who knows, after that, it's only Morocco and then Spain. So, the world is saying halt to him. In the West, where the United Nations government is, that's where 2/3 of the population is. So the United Nations really is running the show with the real Libyan people, okay, in Tripoli, the capital. And it's a UN-backed government led by Fayez al-Sarraj. The East, in Tobruk, it's the UAE, Russia, and Egypt. And the arms are all coming in to Haftar from Egypt. And he's got some very advanced arms. Now that he's marched only 7 miles from Tripoli, he's definitely got a fighting machine. He's lost some people in the fighting, 128 people in the initial fighting, 128 troops, and he lost some heavy military equipment in the first round of fighting. His troops in the Fusa Mountains are in retreat, or at least were, and west of Tripoli, Haftar's troops were also in retreat. But he did bring his troops up through Garyan, about 60 miles south of Tripoli, and moved in 40, then 30, and finally 7 miles from Tripoli. There was fighting at the airport, and Haftar did take over the airport. People fled and were evacuated. So this is a really big deal. And the United Nations doesn't want to give over the government to Haftar in this case. Usually it recedes to a strong man. But in Haftar's case, I don't know if it's inbreeding from first cousin marriages or what, but he wants to run a dictatorship, a military dictatorship. Anybody who's not with him is a terrorist. He's up on, it's questionable, but, I'll be honest with you, he could be easily put on international crimes, war crimes, for what he's already conducted. And yet, there's this delicate thing. He seems to represent everybody because he defects against everybody and joins everybody and puts all odds against the middle. America's afraid to have the CIA involvement exposed. Russia has money on the line. Egypt conducted an important meeting where they basically, in Cairo, with the head of security in Cairo, established how this whole military front would occur with the invasion of Tripoli. So, everybody seems to have dirty hands. No one wants their hands exposed, and Haftar's playing them all. So today we're going to look at some cards that might lend insight into this complex scenario, because soon either Haftar is going to attack, take over Libya, and maybe then Algeria, Morocco, and Spain, which, by the way, is a Nostradamian nightmare. Nostradamus said that there would be a concerted attack against Europe, and it would be northern Africa sweeping from Egypt across through Morocco and up to Spain at the same time that Russia invades England and goes down to Germany, at the same time that Iranian forces come in as well in a multi-front war with an attack on Italy and specifically the Vatican coming across the Adriatic from Muslim countries there. So, I wouldn't normally call out Nostradamus, but here's Haftar with his tanks marching on Tripoli with the intention of going to Algeria. How Nostradamian can it get? So we're going to look at a Russian deck today, and this is the Golden Tarot of the Tsar. Now, this deck unfortunately has very small pictographs and may not film as well as I want it to, but I'll lift the cards up. I only will be turning one card from this deck, hopefully, as more of a just an insight into what Russia's playing at this time. This isn't a Russian reading, though, and this deck may not photograph well, but I'm going to tell you, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous deck in person. So I do recommend it for all people who are interested in having a Russian deck. The second deck we will be looking at, which is the only deck I have that is Islamocentric, and it of course is an Italian deck, and that's the Tarot de Marrakech. And it's funny because it's got French writing, but it's an Italian deck. But this deck is made by Europeans because Muslims do not believe having representations of human faces in art. So tarot readers generally are not Muslim. They tend to be Buddhist, Hindu, Christian, or atheist. And so in this regard, this deck is a portrayal of Islamic life and desert life in general for the Muslim community. And it works very well in readings for any kind of Arabic or Muslim country because it is limited the number of decks that are available for those regions. And then I have a third deck, and the third deck is the Tarot of Nefertari. Now, this is an Egyptian deck, because I wanted something to represent Egypt. And this is not a contemporaneous Egyptian deck. This is an ancient Egyptian deck. And the cards are gorgeous. It's another golden deck done by Lo Scarabeo. And it's basically the art of Nefertari's tomb, which is one of the most beautiful artistic contributions to planet Earth. Now, she wasn't all that nice. She was Pharaoh Ramesses' wife, and I've been to Abu Simbel, where there are pictures of her and him clubbing people to death, etc., etc. So I can imagine that she was a ferocious dictator and leader. But her tomb is beautiful, and maybe, these portrayals in art were just to scare people and she was a nice person. We just don't know. It's too far back in history. We just don't know. So let's begin the spread. I think today what we'll do is we'll shuffle briefly, because I've already shuffled the cards quite a bit, but I'll give them a quick shuffle here so that everybody knows it's all on the up and up. And we want to know about Libya. We're asking the cards to reveal us something about Libya. I don't have a lot of room here, so I'm not going to cut the decks because we're dealing with so many decks in such a small space. And here is the Russian deck. We're asking about Libya. And so that should suffice for everybody to think this is an honest reading. I'm going to move the cards still within view, but as far out of view as I can get them, so I can fit all three into the field here of vision. This is very awkward and difficult, but it is honest, because that's the name of the game, is honesty. And we'll put the Russian deck up over here in the corner, taking up as little room as possible so we have room for our large cards. Okay, so let's see what Egypt is doing. Since Egypt is next to Libya, and they share borders, and they're bringing out the arms and bringing them forward to Libya, they have a lot to say in what's going on. And we have the card Il Matto down below in Italian, which is the fool. And, that's really says quite a bit right there. Egypt may be being very foolish, supporting a military dictator. I don't know what it is, but one of the most foolish things I've noticed about managing, quote unquote, the Muslim world, everybody thinks they need to have a strong man dictator to keep those people in line. And we get horrible dictators in the Middle East, Saddam Hussein, and now Haftar, and there have been many others. And it's just cruelty upon cruelty. It doesn't help to have an insane military leader, be a dictator. And here's the Fonte di Denari, the Knave of Pentacles. So money, they've acted foolishly, but they are accounting for money. The money they want, probably the Russian money they want for delivering the arms. And, where did the arms come from? Was it sold by America to Egypt? And then from Egypt to Haftar? And Russia's paying the bill? And America and London are pretending they're opposing it? I mean, could this be a global setup and they're all on the same side? Who knows? And here's the 8 of Chalices. So we have the 8 of Chalices. Well, that's a really interesting card. It's the card of involvement, or it's the card of renunciation, depending on how it's played in the deck. I'm not going to speak of how the cards come together until all the cards are laid out. So we look to the Marrakesh deck, and the first deck is Six de Tiers, the 6 of Urns. Actually, Six de Tiers, pardon me, Tiers. That's it, the 6 of Urns. Pardon me for my French mispronunciation. It is a second language for me. The second one is the 10 of Mandalas, 10 de Mandala. And the third one is 8 de Scimitar, the 8 of Scimitars. Well, these cards say a lot. The 6 of Urns is a card traditionally of marriage, and the 10 of Mandalas is a card of intergenerational wealth, and the 8 of Scimitars is the 8 of Swords, which is to protect something precious. Now, if we pull out the one Russian card we're going to use sort of as an oracle card, we have very beautiful art here. The Queen of Chalices. And so she will be in the middle representing Russian interests. So what this says about Libya is that they're coming from a very foolhardy place, this invasion by Haftar. They've made their agreements. We know who's in bed with whom. The agreements, I mean, to me, it seems a little bit fraudulent that Haftar, who's a CIA agent, is now taking Russian rubles to work with Egypt to get arms from Egypt, who's an American ally, and use arms that were probably produced by America to invade a United Nations government that's backed by America. I mean, I don't know, but to me, this seems pretty darn fraudulent. Like this is all part of a play to be enacted. And the reason why things are on hold currently would be that, well, Russia has the problem right off the bat of making this a Muslim dictatorship. Russia does not want it to be a Muslim country any longer. And, they're putting their voice into it because they put money in the pot. And you know what? That's not a bad idea, Russia. I mean, Libya is part of Africa, and Africa has many religions. Look at Egypt, it has many religions. And, Russia's saying, hold on a second. If you're accepting our Christian money, and you're accepting arms through a multi-religional society like Egypt, we have to rethink the Muslim concept here, because there's the Islamicists, and we've got some Sunni interests, and Russia has a large Sunni population, larger than its Shiite population base, but they have accords with Iran, and so it may be a religious entanglement problem. And if we put this card to the side so we can just see the others more clearly, we see that accounting from Egypt, the number of arms, the number of money, Russia is the bank with the money. That can be the Queen of Chalices as well. And the Queen of Chalices also means we want our spies in there. You know, here's some FSB. We want them located in your military, in your government. We want our cameras with our tech monitoring you and the oil. Oh my gosh, chalices is the suit of oils. I mean, it has to do with the petroleum industry. And you know, what's so interesting here is that the Queen of Cups, Russia, who has plenty of oil, wants to be the dominatrix of the oil industry of Libya. And here, in terms of Muslim cards, we have the Six of Cups, or Six of Urns in this case, meaning that Libya itself is looking at pennies. Russia's looking at billions of dollars. The money that goes to the actual Libyan people, the actual laborers, and the actual Libyan government from oil sales is nothing compared to what Russia's going to get from this deal. And Egypt, the whole time, has its scribes counting every penny and wanting oil residuals. I tell you, this is all about oil. It's all about oil. And then we have down here the 10 of mandalas, meaning what money will Libya be able to give its future generations? With Russia trying to take the money, with Egypt trying to take the money, the UAE is going to want some money from the oil. They don't just want payment for conquering the country. This may be what's halting the assault on Tripoli. These interests suddenly come forward and say, well, now that you're 7 miles away, we don't just want you to pay for our tanks and our guns and our expertise. And we don't want you just to pay back the rubles. We want 50% of all oil sales from here forward. And that could be why the tanks have stopped. And that doesn't mean they'll always be stopped, but that may be why they're stopped while this show is being filmed. And then we have down here in the future, the 8 of Scimitars, that Libya is trying to protect something precious, something really important to its country, that Libya is protecting its own economy, its own culture, its own heritage, its own oil interests. And the outcome of this for the Egyptians is the 8 of Cups. They want the oil. They want the money from the oil. Egypt does not produce oil like Libya does, and Egypt wants to have some of the oil fields maybe even. I mean, why not? If you can have Libya and Algeria, but we get a slice of Libya, we get some oil fields, please. And so, because Egypt is not an oil-producing country, not like Libya is. And so we see here what I think is a very complicated dance of the oil multinational interests seeking to dominate the world economy and the world energy supply. Well, we knew that, but I don't think people realize how deep the tendrils and tentacles and claws and talons go into the heart of Libya. I mean, I think these people like Egypt and the UAE and Saudi Arabia and Russia and London and America and the United Nations, I mean, let's face it, the United Nations has been running out of debt. Maybe the United Nations would like to have a cut in Libyan oil for running their government. And that could fund the United Nations for 100 years and get them out of debt and stop having to force America to foot the bill for the debt. And, you know, that could be something that Trump desires. So what we have here is, and I'm moving the Russian card here because it's really a floater. It could go anywhere. It could go in the middle, the end, the beginning. But it really does represent the Russian desire to control the global oil trade. And I think these cards are speaking of Haftar 100%. And what I'm not getting are a lot of high cards for the Libyan people. We're getting all lower arcana cards. And we do have a higher arcana card for Egypt. We have a court card for Russia. So I think Haftar is basically trying to bounce between interests that are more powerful than he is. and he's trying to negotiate something that'll work so he can be the dictator of a grand region. You know, because they're taking such big bites out of him, that could be why he wants to invade Algeria, Morocco, and Spain. Because the only way to defend himself against Russia is to end up with a larger landmass than Russia, and have more money than Russia, and more guns than Russia, and stand up against Russia and not let them have their oil. And not let Egypt, with their strict accounting principles and what they think they are owed, not be paid. You know, he could go forward to Algeria, go backwards to Egypt, go forward to Morocco and up to Spain. And maybe Russia will be the one who's plotting this, as Nostradamus said. I mean, here's the Queen of Chalices. This could be the secret elixir in her cup, that there's a plan to invade Western Europe, and that this is going to be a multi-level front. I don't think, from the cards that I'm seeing, that Egypt is involved in this. I think it would be Haftar and Russia that would be involved with this. Haftar, he'll sell out to anyone. And if Russia wants him, they can buy him. They have the money. So I would say that they're at a standstill now, but I'm willing to turn another card to see if the standstill in the standstill will hold. And the answer is the Queen of Mandalas. So the Queen of Mandalas paints a labyrinth in the sand, and all the sides wander through the labyrinth for eternity and never find their way out. The sinking hole of unending war, of unending oil interests. First they're my oil rigs, now they're his oil rigs, now they're their oil rigs. And if you keep passing the oil rigs around, keep changing the generals, keep changing the heads of government, no one gets paid, no one owns the place, and no one knows which end is up. And I think this might be the sinking pool of Libya from here forward.